You're watching DCC TV.
Hi, I'm Barry Trott, Adult Services Director at the Williamsburg Regional Library, and I'd like to welcome you back to another episode of Checking In at Your Library, where we talk about books of all sorts. Today, we're going to talk about police procedurals, those crime novels or mysteries that feature not the amateur detective, not the historical detective, but a policeman or a police team, because some of them really focus on the group working together. Police mysteries are really one of the newer kinds of mysteries in some ways. It's only in the mid-1900s, early 1900s, you start to really get some great police procedurals written, and they really took off in the 1960s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and you get some great police series being written, and they continue to be written today. If you like writers like P.D. James, like Donna Leone, Andrea Camilleri, a lot of the mysteries I'm going to talk about today will be ones that you're going to enjoy, but I'm going to try and highlight some maybe of the lesser-known police procedural mysteries that you might find interesting. So let's get started. The tribulations of small-town policing are not limited to the U.S., as we find in Peter Robinson's series set in Yorkshire, England. This is the Alan Banks series. Inspector Banks is a policeman in Yorkshire. Robinson, again, is a lot of times sort of like Constantine did. Robinson is looking at the way that changes that come to the community affect that community, particularly being reflected in the crimes that are committed there. So again, Yorkshire, England is an area seeing a lot of changes. There's growth. There's new people moving in. Has impact both for the residents there, but also for the police. I think in this Alan Banks series, one of the things that is of most interest or most going to grab your attention is the interplay between Banks and the other members of the force. That interaction between Banks, his superiors, as well as his officers really contributes a great deal to the interest of the story here. So again, Alan Banks series, Piece of My Heart is a good one to start with, but you can really start that series almost anywhere. Go back and read the earlier ones if you like it. But really interesting. One of the interesting things about this is Peter Robinson himself is actually a Canadian. So he's not an Englishman writing about England, but a Canadian writing about a series of mysteries set in Yorkshire, England. Good stories, though. Excellent characters. One of my favorite and sort of off-the-wall police procedurals, and this was recommended to me by one of my colleagues here at the library, is Jan Willem van de Wettering, a great name. His series on the Amsterdam Murder Squad. This is set in Amsterdam in the Netherlands. Van de Wettering, who died just a year or two ago, was a Zen scholar. He actually worked as a policeman in Amsterdam for a while, and his stories are very, very complex. They're really as complex as any Zen koan can be. They involve lots of subplots and ins and outs. These are twisty tales. The writing is very spare in these stories, very elegant. Van de Wettering is very interested in music as well, jazz music particularly, and in some ways the stories have the elements of a jazz piece. They move in and out, different instruments come in, lay back, you have solos, you have group playing. It's really almost like a jazz song to read one of these novels. The Buddhist concepts of right action and cessation of desire seem to play a role in almost all of these stories. These are not fast-paced murder mysteries. If you're looking for something that's really fast-paced, you're not going to find that in the Van de Wettering stories. There's a lot of talking here. There's a lot of walking, a lot of listening, a lot of thinking to get to the end of the story. But they're great stories. They feature a fascinating cast of characters, and really it's the cast of characters you come to care about in these stories. This particular one, Hard Rain, starts off with the discovery of a corpse in a house discovered by folks who are breaking in to burgle the house. Actually, they discover a corpse hanging there. It's assumed it's suicide, but the commissaris, the head of the murder squad, really has an uneasy feeling about this. He thinks it's actually a criminal from his past coming back to haunt him, and indeed that turns out to be the case. The case involves the Amsterdam murder squad in international crime, corruption, and vice. It's a great story, interesting both for its setting, the Amsterdam setting, as well as for the team that works together. So the Van Vettering Amsterdam Murder Squad mysteries, really worth reading. If you've never read them, take a look at them. Another writer who focuses really heavily on the team aspect of police mysteries is Ed McBain, an American writer. Ed McBain has written, I don't know how many dozen books or so, more than a dozen, couple dozen probably, on the 87th Precinct, a fictional police precinct in a large urban setting. It's a long-running series of stories. He covers the lives as well as the, personal lives, I should say, as well as the professional lives of both the officers and the detectives. So he's covers everybody from the foot patrols out on the streets to the detectives back in the offices doing the paper pushing and the thinking in some ways. It's an extremely accurate portrayal of the sights, the feel of police work. He really has a great feel for what police work is, and for, in many ways, for the mundane things that go into police work. Police work isn't all chasing down criminals. There's a lot of things that involve sitting around, waiting for something to happen, looking at things, analyzing. There's a lot of routine work, and McBain does a great job of capturing how that routine work is punctuated by these brief moments of adrenaline. And so it's exciting stories. The language and the police techniques in these always ring true. He never hits a false note. One thing that's interesting about McBain's stories is there's always multiple plot lines going on, featuring different members of the squad. So the multiple stories, usually they eventually converge at the end, but they don't always. Sometimes one plot ends and another plot ends over here. So there's not always a complete convergence, but he really does a great job of portraying the lives and making these officers extremely human. These are great stories just to read about people and the work that they do. If you like Studs Terkel's book Working, about the working lives of folks up in the Chicago area, great nonfiction book, you'll find a lot, I think a lot of similarities in some ways in Ed McBain's writing about the police force. Another big city police book series that you might enjoy is by the late Hugh Holton. He had a day job as a Chicago police detective, and that job certainly lends an air of verisimilitude to Holton's writing here. His novels feature Police Commander Larry Cole. He's the protagonist of these stories. Holton, like McBain, really has an ear for the way the police talk to each other, as well as to the district attorneys and of course to the criminals. And he really has a command of police procedures, as you would expect from someone who is a policeman himself. In this particular book, which I think is a really good one to start with, Chicago Blues, Cole investigates the murder of two mobsters who may have been killed by a former cop who's now serving as a bodyguard for another mobster. So there's mob corruption, there's Chicago politics going on. Good, exciting stories. These are pretty fast-paced, somewhat violent stories. So if you're looking for a cozy mystery, Hugh Holton is not the person you're going to be looking for. These move a lot. There's a lot of shooting. There's a lot of violence. But they're great stories, and again, he really captures very well the day-to-day work of the police in an interesting way and in a big city. One of the most fascinating police procedurals that I've come across over the years of reading mysteries is J. Robert James's series featuring Louis St Cyr and Herman Kohler, excuse me, two policemen who were brought together in somewhat unlikely circumstances. This is set in occupied France during World War II. St Cyr is a member of the Paris Sûreté, and Kohler is a member of the Gestapo. And they're thrown together to solve those ordinary crimes. These aren't really so much books about military crimes, but Kohler and St Cyr are thrown together to solve the ordinary crimes that take place in occupied France that disturb particularly the Nazi occupiers. I think one of the things that's most interesting in these is the sense of danger and despair that's really at the heart of these stories. These are two good men, but they're both thrown into very untenable circumstances. It's interesting that Janes does the unlikely job of making a Gestapo agent almost sympathetic, not completely, and not ever completely sympathetic, but it's an amazing series from that perspective. The relationship between the two men, their loyalties to each other, but also to their respective governments, is really at the heart of the story. It's about two men learning to work together in the most difficult of circumstances. St Cyr, the Frenchman, of course, is suspect both by the resistance forces as being a collaborationist, and suspect by the German occupying forces of being a resistance man. So he's walking a very fine line here. When they go out on a job, he can carry a gun, but he can't carry bullets in his gun until Kohler gives him the bullets. So this is an uneasy relationship at best, but a fascinating setting, really unusual setting, and Janes does a good job of portraying the lives of both these men. This particular instance in the series, Dollmaker, involves or finds the pair sent out to Brittany to investigate the murder of a shopkeeper that seems to be related somehow, perhaps, to a German U-boat commander's life. So they're not really sure what's going on there, and they find themselves, of course, pressured by both sides. The authorities just want this crime covered over, solved, taken out of the way. They don't want anything to come out of that. Good series. Another writer who does a great job of setting his books in a totalitarian state is James Church. His Inspector O novels are set in North Korea. It's a very unusual setting, and the whole idea of doing police work in a police state really makes for an intriguing work of crime fiction. The society here is bleak and oppressive. There's very little that can be said that's positive about the North Korean society. But Inspector O is an honest officer. He tries to be as straightforward, as honest as he can, as ethical as he can, but he's also cynical. He knows what's going on and knows that he really has very little power to control anything. In this particular book that is the start of the series, he's given an apparently routine assignment. He's sent out to watch a highway for cars passing by, but it ends up spiraling into a full-blown exploration of conspiracy, corruption, political maneuvering, and of course danger for Inspector O. Danger not only for his position, but danger of his life, because questioning the state in North Korea, even as a policeman, is not something you want to be doing. Really interesting, unique setting, and really worth reading, I think, because it gives a different perspective. Church is a pseudonym. James Church is a pseudonym, it says, of a former Western intelligence officer with decades of experience in Asia who has wandered through Korea for years. And he really does a good job of capturing what life in Korea is like. Another series that I came across just recently, and this one is one that probably will appeal to fans of Donna Leone's mysteries set in Venice, featuring Guido Brunetti, Inspector Brunetti mysteries. This is Magdalene Nabb's Marshal Guarnaccia series. These are set in Florence. These at their heart are really stories of a man trying to be a good husband, a good father, a good friend, and a conscientious public servant. He's a lot like Brunetti in many ways. For those readers who like Brunetti, I think what you'll find interesting in the Brunetti series by Donna Leone, the inspector is a policeman. Here, the inspector, or the marshal, is a member of the Carabinieri, the military police side of things in Italy, who in the Leone books are always portrayed sort of as bumbling policemen, whereas the real policemen come in and solve the crime. Here it's just the opposite. It presents the different side of the story. The first one in the series, Death of an Englishman, is filled with wit, with humor, with compassion. In this book, Guarnaccia joins forces with a couple of Scotland Yard detectives who've come over to Florence to investigate the death of an Englishman, as the title said, the shooting of an expatriate in the city. The interaction between Guarnaccia and the Scotland Yard detectives is great, and as the series blooms, Guarnaccia becomes the main character. In this first book, he's really, he's not necessarily the main character, he's an important character, but in the rest of the series he comes to the forefront. His marriage, his relationship with his two young sons all come in, so a family piece is really important here. Great stories. The only sad thing about these is Magdalene Nab died a few years ago, fairly young, and so we miss her. She wrote about, I think, 10 of these stories or so, so you can get a lot of them, but there's not any more coming, sadly. But take a look at Magdalene Nab. I just came across what is currently my favorite series. Over the last probably month or two, I've read all of the books in this series. They're the Commissar Adamsberg mysteries by Fred Vargas. Fred Vargas is a French writer. She writes in French, and these are translated. Wonderful stories set primarily in Paris, though the storyline moves as need be from throughout Quebec or throughout the rest of France. And in this particular one, Wash This Blood Clean From My Hands, which is the first one I read in the series. Much of the action takes place in Quebec when the murder squad goes over to Canada for a conference. Excuse me. The interplay between the characters here is what's really important, particularly the interplay between Adamsberg, the chief, and his primary assistant, lieutenant, later captain, Danglard, and then the rest of the force. Adamsberg is a fascinating man. He's not a man who works rationally necessarily. He doesn't sit down and think everything through. He goes out for long walks. He looks at the clouds. He lets ideas come into his head and then follows the strands of those ideas in a way that leads him to usually the solution of the crime. Again, like the earlier books I was talking about, these books are filled with slow-moving writing, long passages of thinking and talking filled with bursts of action, just like real policing is in many ways. The life of the policeman outside the force is equally important in these stories. Really, it's a crucial part of the story, so you want to take that into account. In this particular book, Wash This Blood Clean From My Hands, which is, I think, the third, fourth, fifth or so in the series, the past really haunts the present as a killer from Adamsberg's past, murders that were never really solved, follows him across the ocean to Quebec and almost ends up getting him killed. Great stories, though, highly recommended. I'll return all of them to the library soon, so you can check them out. If you want to look at hard-boiled mysteries, hard-boiled police detectives, there's probably nobody better writing those, I think, than Michael Connelly and in his Harry Bosch series. A lot of police procedurals really focus on the interactions between the members of the force, like I was talking about with the Ed McBain stories and so on. There's also sort of a line of police procedurals that really feature a policeman who's out on his own. He's not trusted by his superiors. He's sort of a loose cannon at times. And I think that Michael Connelly's Larry Bosch stories really are an exemplar of that type of mystery, if you really enjoy those. The novels are known for their relentlessly clear portrayal of life in the LAPD and life in Los Angeles. Connelly, again, like McBain, has really a great command of police procedure, of internal operations, of what goes on, and he uses that knowledge to craft a very believable story and a sobering story. These are dark tales. Bosch is not a happy man. He doesn't have a happy life at home. He doesn't have a great family he can go back to. These are dark stories of a dark man working through his demons at work and off work. Bosch does not suffer fools gladly. It's an attitude that puts him at odds with his superiors as well as his underlings fairly frequently. Here, he continues to investigate the apparent suicide of a narcotics officer despite insistence from the top that he back off. Bosch is not one to back off just because he's told to back off. When he gets his teeth into a crime, he wants to follow it to the end. He's really looking for justice. I think that's at the heart what these books are about, is justice in an unjust and chaotic world. Another really interesting series that I found relatively recently and just started reading again is by Reginald Hill. These are the Dalziel and Pascoe mysteries. In a lot of police procedurals, you find the tension set up between a senior officer and a junior officer, and usually the senior officer is sort of a polished, urbane character, and the junior officer is sort of a rough-hewn, middle-class, maybe lower-middle-class officer. And they bump heads, they sort of butt heads because they're coming from two different worlds. Hill turns that theme or paradigm upside down, and he makes the senior officer, in this case Superintendent Dalziel, an overbearing, coarse, and very blunt fellow. He says what he thinks. He doesn't worry about offending people. His language is not the best all the time. And his underling, his junior partner, I should say, Inspector Pascoe, much more mannered, much more introspective, much more thoughtful, better at working with people, better at finding those lines between things to slip in, whereas Dalziel just bulls his way in and pushes through. Despite these differences, the two of them work incredibly well together and develop a deep friendship. The interplay between them certainly adds to the appeal of the novel. And the relationship between the two and between their spouses develops over the course of the stories. It's fascinating. In this particular book, Dalziel, who likes to drink, is coming home one night in a state of inebriation, sees the death of a woman. But is it murder or is it suicide? Well, you have to read the book to find out. The series goes on. It involves a lot of policing in different aspects of policing in Great Britain. One of the later books in the series, Death Comes for the Fat Man, which I just read, Dalziel is the Fat Man, involves terrorism. Again, fascinating book with very contemporary storylines. So check out these Reginald Hill, Dalziel, and Pascoe stories. The last book, like the Reginald Hill one, takes two officers from completely different sides of the social spectrum. And again, in this one, the senior officer is the one who comes from the lower, rougher side of things, and the more junior officer comes from the polished, urbane, well-to-do side of the community. Malone excels at depicting the role of policing in a small town, sort of like K.C. Constantine, who we started off with those Mario Balzac novels. The stories here are set in small town, in this case North Carolina. Not so much, you don't have that dying mill town feel that you got in the K.C. Constantine books, but you do have a sort of a growing community in the South, in the New South, in Piedmont, North Carolina. There's a lot of social issues that come forth in Malone's books. He has a series of 3 crime novels, the Hillston Mysteries, set in this town. Malone's police officers are very much part of the community. They grew up there. They know everybody there. There's a lot of racial issues, of course, because this is the South in these stories, so that's a piece of almost all of these. In this particular book, the first one in the series, the position of the officers in the community really complicates the investigation of the series of deaths among the social elites. Cuddy Mangum, the police chief, steps in, and he's sort of rough-hewn. He steps on people's toes. Justin Seville, his lieutenant, is of that social elite, but the people don't trust him because he's now part of the police force. Malone's detectives come from the opposite sides of the social spectrum, but they work well together. But the contrast is what's fascinating these, and they're just great stories. They're really wonderful stories. Malone is a great storyteller. He has other fiction as well as his crime fiction, but these are among my favorites of Malone's writing. Well, that covers police procedurals today. We've talked about a few of my favorites. There's lots of other books here at the library. If you like police procedurals, we can help you find them. Come to the reference desk. We're always happy to help you find the books you're looking for. You can also check us out on the web, our new website, www.wrl.org. Go to the books and reading section. We have new book lists. We have reading lists of crime and other genre fiction. We have a link to our reader profile form, which you can fill out, and we'll send you a list of titles that you might be interested in. We're happy to help you find reading any way that you want to do it. So come on into the library, check us out virtually on the web, and we look forward to seeing you next time here at Checking In at Your Library.